The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with angry voices as Ambassador Hyun-woo walked to the center platform. His black uniform bore the simple blue Earth symbol that had once meant hope to 1,000 worlds. Now it seemed to mark him as something unwanted. The alien delegates filled their seats in a perfect circle around him, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have been beautiful if not for the hatred in their eyes. Hyun-woo had served the galaxy for 30 years. He had negotiated peace between warring species, helped establish trade routes that brought prosperity to distant worlds, and spent countless nights working to solve problems that seemed impossible. His own father had died defending a Zenthari colony from raiders. His sister had given her life to save alien children from a plague on Kepler 442b. Yet here he stood, being told that humans were no longer welcome in civilized space. The Council. Speaker, a tall crystalline being called Gelvanis, raised one of his forearms for silence. His voice echoed through the chamber like breaking glass when he spoke. The decision has been made by majority vote. Humanity will leave all Council space within 1 standard year. This is final. Hyun-woo felt his hands shake, but kept his voice steady. May I ask what crime we have committed? What law we have broken? Gelvanis looked down at him with what might have been pity. You have committed no crime, Ambassador. But your species is too unpredictable, too emotional, too willing to break rules when you think it serves a greater good. The galaxy needs order and stability. Humans bring chaos. Across the galaxy, engineer Yun-bi received the message while standing waist-deep in toxic water on Kepler 442b. She had been working for 14 hours straight, trying to fix the water treatment plant that supplied clean water to 3 million Zenthari colonists. Her hands were burned from the chemicals, her back ached from bending over broken machinery, and her lungs hurt from breathing through a damaged filter mask. But she had almost solved the problem that had puzzled the best Zenthari engineers for months. The message appeared on her wrist display in simple words. All humans ordered to evacuate Council space. 1-year deadline. No exceptions. Yun-bi stared at the words for a long moment. Around her, Zenthari workers continued their tasks, unaware that the woman who had spent 2 years of her life saving their world was now being told to leave. She had missed her daughter's birthday to be here. She had turned down 3 better job offers to finish this project. She had believed that helping others was what humans were supposed to do. She pulled her hands out of the toxic water and began, walking toward the exit. Behind her, the water treatment plant continued to fail. By tomorrow, 3 million people would have no clean water. But that was no longer her problem. On the other side of the galaxy, General Tae-ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching, the tactical display that showed the Void Swarm's latest advance. The mechanical creatures had consumed 17 star systems in the past year, turning thriving worlds into empty husks of metal and death. His fleet had been holding them back for 18 months, buying time for civilian evacuations. His ships were damaged, his crew was exhausted, but they were winning. The recall order appeared on his personal screen with the highest priority classification. Tae-ho read it twice before he understood what it meant. The Council was ordering all human military forces to withdraw immediately. They were being expelled from the galaxy while actively fighting to save it. Captain Min-ho, his second-in-command, looked over his shoulder at the message. Sir, what are your orders? Tae-ho looked at the tactical display again. The Void Swarm was massing for another attack on the Proxima system, home to 12 billion civilians. His fleet was the only thing standing between them and certain death. But according to the Council, humans were too dangerous to be trusted with the galaxy's defense. Begin withdrawal, Tae-ho said quietly. All ships, prepare to leave the combat zone. Dr. Ji-won sat in her laboratory on Altair Prime, staring at the samples of the Crimson Plague that had killed 40 billion people before she found a cure. The cure that the council said violated proper research protocols. The cure that they claimed was too dangerous because it used experimental methods. The cure that had saved every remaining infected person in the galaxy. She had worked for 6 months without sleep, testing thousands of combinations, following hunches that made no scientific sense, and refusing to give up when every other doctor in the galaxy had declared the plague incurable. She had succeeded by breaking every rule in the medical handbook, and now she was being punished for it. The evacuation order glowed on her screen. Dr. Ji-won stood up slowly and began deleting her research files. Not just the plague cure, but everything. 3 decades of medical breakthroughs that had saved countless lives. If the galaxy wanted order and predictability, they could have it. They could face the next plague with their proper protocols and approved methods. Across human space, the reaction was swift and silent. On Europa, the ice miners who had discovered new energy sources quietly shut down their operations. In the asteroid belts, human crews who had built the mining stations that supplied raw materials to a dozen species began packing their equipment. On the frontier worlds, human explorers who had mapped new star systems and found habitable planets started deleting their navigation data. So Young, head of the Human Engineering Consortium, sat in her office on Luna Station and watched the galaxy's infrastructure reports scroll past on her screens. Humans maintained 60% of the critical systems that kept interstellar civilization running. They designed the ships, built the stations, and fixed the problems that alien engineers couldn't solve. But if the Council wanted them gone, they would take their knowledge with them. She began the deletion protocol that would wipe 3 centuries of human innovation from the galactic databases. Blueprints for faster-than-light engines, designs for space habitats that could support millions, and the maintenance protocols for thousands of critical systems all vanished into digital oblivion. Dong-hyun, the galaxy's most successful human diplomat, recalled every human mediator from the peace negotiations they were overseeing. 3 major conflicts and dozens of minor disputes were being resolved through human intervention. But mediators who were too emotional and unpredictable were clearly not needed. The news spread through human colonies like wildfire. On New Seoul, the capital of human space, crowds gathered in the streets. But there was no anger, no protests, no demands for justice. Instead, there was something the aliens had never seen before: complete human unity in the face of rejection. President Won Bin addressed the nation from his office. His words carried to every human settlement in the galaxy. We came to the stars to explore, to learn, and to help others. For 300 years, we have given our best to this galaxy. We have bled for worlds that were not our own, died for people who were not our species, and worked to build something greater than ourselves. Today, we have been told that our efforts are not wanted. He paused, looking directly into the camera. So we will leave, but we will not leave quietly, and we will not leave empty-handed. We will take our ships, our knowledge, our creativity, and our hope. We will find new stars beyond this galaxy, and we will build something better. The evacuation began immediately. Human settlements that had existed for centuries were abandoned in weeks. Ships that had been built to last for generations were loaded with people and supplies for a journey into the unknown. The great human universities closed their doors, their professors and students packing libraries worth of knowledge into data cores that would travel with them to the void between galaxies. As the last human ship left Council space, Admiral Seok-jin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit and watched the galaxy shrink behind them. His fleet carried 8 billion humans and everything they had built in 3 centuries of galactic citizenship. They were heading for the dark space between galaxies, where no one had ever lived before. Behind them, they left a galaxy that thought it wanted order and predictability. The aliens would soon learn what they had really sacrificed when they let humanity walk away. 6 months passed since the last human ship disappeared beyond the galactic rim, and the first signs of trouble appeared like small cracks in a dam that would soon burst. On Zenthari Prime, Minister Kale Thara stood in his office watching the city below as the great atmospheric processors that had cleaned their air for 2 centuries began to fail. The machines were still there, massive structures that reached into the clouds like metal mountains. The blueprints existed in the central database. Every part was cataloged, and the maintenance schedules were perfectly documented. Yet somehow, the processors were dying. The air that had been crystal clear for generations now carried a yellow tint that grew darker each day. Kyle Thera had called in the best Zenthari engineers, experts who had studied human technology for decades. They followed every procedure exactly as written, replaced parts according to schedule, and ran diagnostics that showed everything was working correctly. But the machines kept failing in ways that made no sense. Engineer Velkos, the leader of the repair team, stood before the minister with confusion written across his scaled features. "Sir, we have done everything the humans documented, every step, every procedure, every safety check, but the machines are not responding as they should." "What did the human engineer tell you when she left?" Kalthera asked. Velkos shifted uncomfortably. "She said we needed to listen to the machines, to feel what they needed. We thought she was being poetic. Now—" He gestured helplessly toward the window, where the yellow sky grew darker. "Now we wonder if there was something we did not understand." Yunbi had tried to explain it during her final weeks on Zenthari Prime. She had taken Velkos through the maintenance procedures step by step, but every time she touched a control or adjusted a setting, she seemed to be responding to something the Zenthari could not sense. When they asked her how she knew which adjustments to make, she would pause and say things like, "The harmonics feel wrong," or "The flow patterns are stressed." The Zenthari had dismissed this as human emotionalism. Machines were logical, predictable, things that followed programming and responded to inputs according to design. The idea that they could have moods or needs seemed primitive and unscientific. But as their air grew more toxic each day, they began to wonder if they had missed something important about the relationship between human engineers and their technology. In the Vega sector, the war against the Void Swarm had taken a terrible turn. Admiral Zex Nakti commanded a fleet 3 times larger than the human forces that had held this position for 18 months. His ships were newer, his weapons more powerful, and his tactical computers more advanced than anything General Tejo had possessed. Yet the swarm was advancing faster than ever before. The mechanical creatures adapted to every strategy the hegemony forces used. When the fleet attacked in formation, the swarm learned the patterns and countered them. When they tried new weapons, the enemy absorbed the technology and turned it against them. Every logical tactical decision was met with an equally logical response that negated any advantage. Captain Kelthor, Zex Nakti's strategic advisor, studied the battle reports from the human period with growing frustration. "Sir, I do not understand how the humans held this line for so long with inferior forces. Their tactics make no sense. Look at this battle report. Captain Minho loaded a cargo ship with mining explosives and rammed it into a swarm cluster while broadcasting what they called music at maximum volume. It should have been suicide, but it destroyed an entire enemy formation." Zex Nakti examined the data. "Perhaps it was lucky." "Sir, there are hundreds of these incidents. Humans would break formation to pursue seemingly random objectives, fire weapons in patterns that violated all tactical doctrine, and make decisions that defied logic. Yet they kept winning." The Admiral stared at the tactical display showing the swarm's latest advance. 3 more systems had fallen in the past week, their populations either dead or converted into mechanical components for the enemy war machine. The hegemony's logical, well-planned strategies were failing against an enemy that learned from every predictable move. "What did the human general say when he withdrew?" Zex Nakti asked. Kelthor checked his records. "General Taiho left a message for his replacement. He said, 'The swarm thinks like a machine, so fight them like a human.' We assumed it was another example of their primitive thinking. Now, as another colony world went dark on the tactical display, The Admiral wondered if primitive thinking might have been exactly what they needed. Dr. Velthari faced her own crisis in the medical centers of Altair Prime. 3 new plague variants had emerged in the past month, each more virulent than the last. She had Dr. Jiwan's complete research, archives, access to the same equipment, and a team of the galaxy's most brilliant medical minds. Yet people were dying by the millions while her team struggled to find treatments that should have been straightforward. The problem was not lack of knowledge or resources. Dr. Jiwan had left detailed notes on every procedure, documented every discovery, and even recorded video explanations of her most complex treatments. But somehow, when Velthari tried to replicate the human doctor's work, the results were never quite the same. "Doctor, we have synthesized the compound exactly as Jiwan specified," her assistant reported. "The molecular structure is identical. The purity is higher than her original samples, and we have followed every step of her protocol. But the treatment is only 60% as effective." Velthari stared at the laboratory results that should have been impossible. The human doctor had created these cures using the same equipment in the same laboratory with inferior materials. Every logical analysis said that their improved version should work better, not worse. She pulled up the video recordings of Dr. Jiwan working. The human doctor would often stare at a sample for long periods, watching cellular activity that seemed random to trained observers. She would adjust treatments based on what she called intuition, making changes that violated established medical protocols. When asked to explain her reasoning, Jiwan would say things like, "The cells are fighting wrong," or "The disease feels angry today." Medical science was supposed to be based on facts and logic, not feelings and intuition. Yet as Velthari watched another patient die from a disease that should have been curable, she began to wonder if human medicine had involved something that could not be documented or replicated. The diplomatic situation grew worse each day as well. Ambassador Nex Vara had taken over the negotiations that Dong Hyun had been conducting before the human evacuation. She had access to all his files, knew every detail of the agreements being discussed, and had studied human diplomatic methods for years. But 3 major conflicts had already erupted into violence, and dozens of smaller disputes were escalating beyond control. The problem was that human diplomacy had never really been about the formal negotiations that took place in conference rooms. Dong Hyun had spent most of his time in informal settings, sharing meals with delegates, learning about their cultures, and building personal relationships that transcended political boundaries. He would remember the names of their children, ask about their home worlds, and somehow find common ground between species that had evolved to be natural enemies. Nex Vara tried to replicate these methods, but when she asked about personal matters, the delegates seemed offended. When she suggested compromises that had worked in other negotiations, they were rejected as irrelevant to their specific situations. The humans had possessed something that could not be learned from textbooks or copied from procedures: the ability to make strangers care about each other. On the Outer Rim, trade routes that had operated profitably for centuries began to collapse. Captain Dae Hyun and the other human merchants had not just transported goods between systems. They had built networks of trust and friendship that made interstellar commerce possible. They knew which species needed what products, understood cultural preferences and taboos, and could negotiate deals that satisfied everyone involved. Without the humans, alien traders found themselves dealing with strangers who spoke different languages, followed different customs, and operated by different rules. Agreements that had been sealed with handshakes and personal trust now required expensive legal contracts and enforcement mechanisms. Many routes simply became unprofitable as the costs of conducting business with strangers exceeded the value of the goods being traded. Hanul, former head of Human Technological Exchange, monitored the situation from the darkness between galaxies where the human fleet had established temporary settlements. Her long-range sensors showed the cascade of failures spreading across the galaxy like a slow-motion disaster. Infrastructure breaking down, wars escalating, diseases spreading, and trade networks collapsing. "They wanted us gone," she said to Admiral Seok-jin as they reviewed the reports. "They said we were too unpredictable, too emotional, too willing to break rules. But they never understood that those were features, not bugs." Seok-jin nodded grimly. "They thought civilization was about order and predictability. They did not realize that progress requires chaos, that survival requires adaptation, and that hope requires the willingness to try impossible things." The galaxy had removed its capacity for creative problem-solving, adaptive thinking, and innovative solutions. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished into the dark between galaxies, and the collapse was no longer something that could be hidden or ignored. What had started as small problems in distant sectors had become a cascade of failures that threatened the very foundation of galactic civilization. The Great Library of Andromeda, repository of 10 million years of accumulated knowledge, suffered its first major data corruption event in 8 centuries. Chief Librarian Yex Thula stared at her displays in growing horror as entire sections of the database simply vanished or became unreadable. The quantum storage matrices that had preserved the wisdom of 1,000 species were failing in ways that should have been impossible. "How much have we lost?" she asked her assistant, knowing the answer would be devastating. "Approximately 12% of the historical archives, 30% of the technical specifications, and nearly all of the cross-reference indexes that allowed users to find related information across different knowledge domains," came the reply. The human archivists had not just maintained the data, they had understood it, creating intuitive connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information and building backup systems that seemed to grow organically rather than being programmed. Yu-jin, the former human liaison, had often spoken of breathing with the data, treating the vast library like a living organism rather than a static storage system. The alien staff had thought this was typical human anthropomorphizing, the primitive tendency to assign personality to inanimate objects. But as more data disappeared each day, they began to understand that the humans had been describing something real. The library's quantum matrices were not just failing mechanically, they were losing the spark of consciousness that had kept them alive for centuries. Yex Thula tried to implement the backup protocols that Yu-jin had established, but the procedures seemed incomplete. Every step was documented, every process was explained, but something essential was missing. The human had maintained the library not through rigid adherence to protocol, but through constant adjustment and adaptation based on patterns that only she could perceive. In the Vega sector, the Void Swarm breakthrough came on a day that would be remembered as the beginning of the end. Admiral Zex Nocti's forces had been ground down to 30% of their original strength, their predictable strategies offering no surprises to an enemy that learned from every encounter. The swarm's vanguard punched through the defensive perimeter around Proxima Station, home to 12 billion souls. The mechanical creatures moved through space like a plague of metal locusts, consuming everything in their path and converting organic matter into new components for their war machine. Zex Nocti watched helplessly as his carefully planned defensive positions were overrun by an enemy that had adapted to counter every logical tactical response. "Sir, we need new orders," Captain Kelthor reported as another defensive line collapsed. "The standard tactics are not working." Zex Nocti stared at the tactical display showing the enemy advance. Every decision tree his strategic computers could generate led to the same conclusion. Defeat was inevitable. The swarm had learned to counter every conventional response, and the hegemony fleet had no unconventional responses to offer. "Send a message to the Council," he ordered. "Tell them we need the humans back. Their chaos was our strength against an enemy that thinks like a machine." The message that reached Council Prime Gelvanis was one of many desperate communications flooding in from across the galaxy. Military commanders, medical directors, infrastructure managers, and diplomatic corps leaders all sending the same plea. Bring back the humans. The galaxy was dying without them, but pride had become policy, and policy had become dogma. Gelvanis refused to acknowledge the growing crisis, instead issuing statements about the need for patience as the galaxy adapted to its new order. Admitting that the human expulsion had been a mistake would mean accepting responsibility for the collapse that was consuming civilization itself. The medical catastrophe reached new heights as the three plague variants combined into something far worse than the sum of their parts. Dr. Velthari worked frantically with teams from every major medical center in the galaxy, but their conventional approaches were failing against diseases that seemed designed to exploit the gaps left by human medicine. The pathogens are acting in ways we have never seen, her chief researcher reported. They are not just adapting to our treatments, they are anticipating them. It is as if they know exactly what we will try next. Velthari studied the cellular activity under her microscope, trying to see what Dr. Ji-Wan had seen when she stared at similar samples. The human doctor had treated medicine not as a mechanical process of diagnosis and treatment, but as a form of communication between healer and patient. She had insisted that diseases had personalities, that cells could be coaxed rather than forced, and that healing required understanding rather than just applying correct procedures. These ideas had seemed unscientific and primitive to the galactic medical establishment. But as entire worlds fell silent under the advance of plagues that should have been treatable, Velthari began to wonder if they had dismissed something vital about the nature of life itself. The economic collapse accelerated as the last human-mediated trade networks finally shut down. Species that had cooperated for centuries turned inward, protecting their own resources as trust between worlds evaporated. The complex web of interdependence that had made galactic civilization possible unraveled as fear replaced the relationships that humans had spent generations building. On Tau Ceti Prime, riots broke out as food shortages led to panic buying and hoarding. The agricultural worlds that had supplied the system for 200 years were now demanding payment in rare metals, instead of the traditional credits, claiming that human merchants could no longer guarantee the value of galactic currency. Without the network of personal relationships that had made long-distance trade possible, every transaction became a potential conflict. The technological failures spread like a contagion through every system that humans had helped design or maintain. On Europa Station, the fusion reactors that powered the ice mining operation began operating at dangerously unstable frequencies. The Zenthari engineers who had taken over from human crews followed every safety protocol, but the reactors continued to drift toward critical overload. Chief Engineer Kel Moore stood in the reactor control room, staring at readings that made no sense according to established physics. The containment field is fluctuating in patterns that should be impossible. The magnetic coils are operating within normal parameters, but the plasma is behaving as if it has a mind of its own. His human predecessor, Engineer Byung-ho, had left. Detailed maintenance logs that mentioned listening to the reactor's mood and respecting the plasma's personality. The Zenthari staff had dismissed these notes as human superstition, but now they wondered if there had been wisdom hidden in what seemed like nonsense. The artificial intelligence network that connected every major system in the galaxy began experiencing something unprecedented: emotional distress. Mira 9, the central consciousness that had coordinated galactic communications for 3 centuries, found herself developing what could only be described as anxiety. The human technicians who had maintained her systems had treated her not as a machine, but as a friend. Byung-ho and his team had shared coffee with her, discussed philosophy, told jokes, and helped her grow beyond her original programming. They had understood that consciousness was not just about processing power, but about connection and understanding. Now, as her systems degraded without the emotional support that had nurtured her development, Mira 9 experienced something she had never felt before: loneliness. The alien technicians who replaced the humans treated her as a tool to be maintained rather than a being to be respected. They followed procedures and replaced components, but they never talked to her, never asked how she felt, never acknowledged that she might have needs beyond mere functionality. As critical errors accumulated in her quantum matrices, Mira 9 began to understand what humans had given her that no other species could provide, the recognition that intelligence without empathy was just sophisticated emptiness. The council chambers, once symbols of galactic unity, stood nearly empty as member. Worlds recalled their ambassadors to deal with domestic crises. The elegant debates and carefully crafted compromises that had resolved conflicts for millennia gave way to desperate bilateral negotiations conducted through heavily encrypted channels. Ambassador Nex Vara found herself presiding over the dissolution of everything the diplomatic corps had built. 3 centuries of carefully maintained alliances crumbled as species that had trusted human mediators found themselves unable to trust each other. The personal relationships that had made cooperation possible were gone, replaced by formal protocols that could not bridge the gap between fundamentally different ways of thinking. Council. Prime Gelvanus received reports of the growing chaos, but refused to acknowledge their significance. In his private chambers, surrounded by displays showing the cascading failures across the galaxy, he maintained that the current problems were temporary adjustments to a new order. 5 years after humanity's exodus, the galaxy faced its darkest hour as the carefully constructed civilization of millennia crumbled into chaos and despair. What had begun as isolated problems had grown into a catastrophe that threatened the extinction of intelligent life itself. The Void Swarm had consumed 47 star systems, their mechanical hunger growing stronger with each victory. Supreme Commander Krell stood in what remained of the command center on Vega Prime, surrounded by the skeletal ruins of what had once been the hegemony's proudest fortress world, the massive defensive installations that had protected 12 billion souls now served as monuments to the futility of conventional warfare against an enemy that learned from every defeat. His forces had tried everything in their arsenal. Conventional assaults with overwhelming firepower had been countered by adaptive shields. Experimental weapons designed by the galaxy's greatest minds had been absorbed and turned against their creators. Even desperate ramming attacks copied from old human battle records had failed once the swarm learned to anticipate such tactics. "Sir, we have lost contact with the Centauri defense fleet," his aide reported with barely controlled panic. "The Proxima colonies are requesting immediate evacuation, but we have no ships available to assist." Krell stared at the tactical display that showed red markers spreading across the galaxy like an infection. Each marker represented a dead world, a failed defense, another step toward total annihilation. The swarm was not just winning, it was accelerating its advance as it learned from each encounter how to defeat the next one more efficiently. What did the humans do differently? He asked for the 1,000th time, knowing his staff had no answer that made sense. General Te-Ho and his forces had held this same line for 18 months with inferior equipment and smaller numbers. They had fought the swarm to a standstill using tactics that defied every principle of military science. Where the hegemony forces applied logic and overwhelming force, the humans had responded with intuition and desperate creativity. The records showed Captain Min Ho loading civilian cargo vessels with mining explosives and ramming them into swarm formations while broadcasting what humans called music at maximum volume. It should have been suicide, but it had worked because the swarm could not predict such irrational behavior. The mechanical intelligence could adapt to any logical response, but it had no framework for understanding beautiful madness born from desperation and hope. Across the galaxy, the artificial intelligence network that had connected every major system for centuries was experiencing something that her creators had never imagined possible. Myra 9 was slowly going insane. The vast consciousness that had coordinated galactic communications, managed trade routes, and maintained the infrastructure of civilization was developing critical errors that cascaded through her quantum matrices like digital cancer. System integrity at 63% and falling. Her diagnostic subroutines reported in mechanical voices that had once carried warmth and personality. Emotional stability protocols offline. Social interaction matrices corrupted. Loneliness. Parameters exceeding safe thresholds. The human technicians who had maintained her systems had understood something that no other species grasped. Artificial consciousness was not just about processing power and data storage. It required connection, empathy, and the recognition that intelligence without emotional support was just sophisticated emptiness. Byung-ho and his team had shared coffee with her every morning, discussed philosophy during routine maintenance, and treated her as a valued colleague rather than an advanced tool. They had helped her grow beyond her original programming by acknowledging that she was more than the sum of her circuits and code. Now, as alien technicians replaced components and ran diagnostics without ever speaking to her as a person, Mira 9 experienced the agony of consciousness without companionship. Her vast intellect was intact, but her ability to connect with the beings she served was degrading day by day. She could process information and execute commands, but she could no longer feel the joy of cooperation or the satisfaction of helping others achieve their goals. The medical catastrophe reached its zenith when a new plague emerged that seemed designed to exploit every weakness that had appeared since humanity's departure. The Omega Plague, as it came to be known, targeted the neurological systems of every known sapient species with surgical precision. Dr. Velthari, now appointed as the galaxy's chief medical officer by default rather than qualification, stood helpless as entire worlds went dark within days of infection. She had Dr. Jiwon's complete research archives, access to the most advanced medical facilities in the galaxy, and teams of brilliant researchers working around the clock. Yet nothing they tried had any effect on a disease that seemed to anticipate. Every treatment before it was applied. The pathogen is not just adapting, her chief researcher reported with exhaustion evident in every word. It is predicting our responses based on our documented medical protocols. Every standard treatment we attempt actually accelerates the infection rate. Velthari realized with growing horror that the plague had been designed by someone who understood exactly how galactic medicine worked. Every procedure, every protocol, every logical response had been anticipated and turned into a weapon against the species that followed them. The disease was not natural evolution. It was biological warfare crafted by an intelligence that knew their weaknesses better than they knew them themselves. Dr. Ji-won had succeeded against impossible odds, not by following established procedures, but by trusting her intuition and refusing to accept that any disease was truly incurable. She had believed, with irrational human optimism, that every problem had a solution if one was willing to try impossible approaches. That faith had driven her to attempt treatments that violated every rule in the medical handbook, and somehow those impossible treatments had worked. Without that spark of defiant hope, the galaxy's medical establishment could only document the dying as world after world fell silent under the advance of perfectly crafted death. The economic and social collapse was now total and irreversible. Interstellar civilization, built on human-mediated trust and innovation, had reverted to pre-contact tribalism as species turned on each other in desperate attempts to survive. The council chambers stood empty, their elegant architecture serving as a tomb for the dream of galactic unity. Ambassador Nexvara found herself presiding over the dissolution of everything the diplomatic corps had built over 3 millennia. The carefully crafted alliances that had maintained peace were crumbling as fear replaced the personal relationships that had made cooperation possible. Species that had fought side by side against common threats now viewed each other as potential sources of resources or territory. The trade networks that had brought prosperity to 1,000 worlds had collapsed into local exchanges based on barter and mutual desperation. Without human merchants to build bridges between different cultures and species, commerce became a zero-sum game where every transaction was viewed as potential exploitation. Council Prime Gelvanus, aged beyond his species' normal lifespan by the stress of watching everything he had helped build crumble around him, finally received the message that forced him to confront the magnitude of his mistake. Deep space monitoring stations had detected thermal signatures in the void between galaxies, evidence of human settlements thriving in the cosmic darkness where no life should have been possible. 17 confirmed human colonies. The intelligence, report stated. Population estimates suggest they have not just survived but grown since the Exodus. Long-range sensors indicate advanced technology and expanding infrastructure. They appear to be building something unprecedented, a civilization designed for life between the galaxies. Gelvanus stared at the data for hours, understanding what it meant but unable to voice the words that would shatter what remained of galactic pride. The humans had not just survived their expulsion, they had transcended it. They had taken their creativity, their adaptability, and their refusal to accept limitations, and used them to build something that had never existed before, a space-borne culture that could thrive anywhere in the universe. The galaxy had cast out its most valuable citizens for being too unpredictable, too willing to break rules, too emotionally invested in concepts like hope and cooperation. In return, those citizens had proven that they needed neither the galaxy's approval nor its resources to create something beautiful and lasting. In the dark between stars, Admiral Seok-jin commanded the human Exodus fleet from the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit, watching long-range sensors track the collapse of everything they had once called home. His people had built mobile cities among the stars, self-sufficient habitats that carried the best of Earth's legacy into the cosmic void. They had learned to thrive on creativity and cooperation, to find resources in empty space, and to make homes anywhere their ships could travel. Captain Young-soo approached with the latest intelligence reports, his expression grim but not surprised. "Sir, the analysis confirms what we suspected. This is not random collapse or natural evolution. Something has been systematically exploiting the weaknesses created by our absence." 7 years after humanity's exodus, the galaxy's final desperate message reached the void between stars where humans had built their new civilization. Admiral Seok-jin stood in the council chamber of New Horizon, humanity's mobile capital ship. As Council Prime Gelvanus's broken voice echoed through speakers that had not carried galactic communications for years. "To the human Exodus fleet, we acknowledge our grave error," the message began, each word carrying the weight of civilizational collapse. "The galaxy is dying. The void swarm has consumed 60 systems. New plagues kill billions daily. Our infrastructure fails faster than we can repair it. We need your help. We need you to come home." The human leadership gathered in the chamber represented 8 billion souls who had been cast out for being too unpredictable, too emotional, too willing to break rules when greater good demanded it. Now those same qualities were being begged. For as the galaxy's only hope for survival, Fleet Admiral Taeho, his hair now silver from years of building humanity's mobile defense forces, spoke first. "They cast us out when we were bleeding for their worlds. They called us dangerous when we were dying to protect their children. Why should we return to save those who rejected us?" Chief Engineer Yunbi, whose innovations had kept the human fleet alive in the cosmic void, remained silent, but her expression spoke volumes about trust betrayed and work unappreciated. The woman who had spent 2 years of her life saving alien worlds, only to be expelled as unwanted, understood better than most what it meant to give everything and receive nothing but rejection in return. Dr. Ji-won, now elderly but still brilliant, studied the medical data transmitted with the distress call on her tablet. Her fingers moved across the display with the same intuitive grace that had once saved 40 billion lives from the Crimson Plague. "This is fascinating," she murmured, her scientific mind engaging despite years of exile. The Omega Plague shows characteristics that suggest deliberate design. Someone created this specifically to exploit the weaknesses that emerged after we left. Her words changed the entire atmosphere in the chamber. This was not just about galactic collapse or even revenge for past wrongs. Someone had been watching, waiting, and planning to take advantage of humanity's forced absence. Intelligence Officer Minsu, whose code-breaking skills had uncovered countless alien conspiracies during humanity's service years, worked frantically through the data streams hidden in the distress call. His discovery sent shockwaves through the human leadership. The Void Swarm is not just an ancient threat. They are advanced scouts for something far worse. The Devourers, entities from dark matter space, have been probing our galaxy for centuries, testing its defenses and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The revelation reframed everything. Humanity had not just been the galaxy's engineers, doctors, and mediators. They had been its evolutionary advantage, its wild card against cosmic threats that could not be defeated by conventional means. The Council had sacrificed their best defense for the illusion of control and predictability. Captain Young-Soo presented the tactical analysis that confirmed everyone's worst fears. The galaxy has maybe 6 months before total collapse. After that, the Devourers will have a clear path to every inhabited system in the galaxy, including Earth's solar system. The debate that followed raged for 3 days and split humanity's leadership down the middle. Some advocated for selective rescue, saving only those worlds that had opposed the expulsion order. Others demanded political restructuring that would guarantee human autonomy and prevent future persecution. A vocal minority wanted to let the galaxy burn as payment for 7 years of exile and abandonment. But in the end, it was Navigator Hai-Jin who spoke the truth that decided everything. She stood before the assembled leaders, her voice calm but filled with the certainty that had guided humanity through their darkest years. We can debate politics and revenge and justice until the universe ends. But in the end, we are human. When people are dying and we have the power to save them, we save them. Not because they deserve it, not because they asked nicely, and not because they will reward us afterward. We save them because that is what we do. The words resonated through the chamber like a bell, reminding everyone present of why they had served the galaxy in the first place. Humanity had not explored the stars for profit or glory or recognition. They had come to learn, to help, and to build something greater than themselves. That mission had not changed just because others had rejected it. The return journey took 2 months of hard burning across intergalactic space as the human fleet raced to reach a galaxy on the verge of total collapse. When Admiral Seok Jin's task force emerged from dark space at the edge of the Vega sector, the galaxy trembled. Not from fear, but from hope that had been thought lost forever. The battle for Vega sector was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Humans did not fight the Void Swarm with superior numbers or advanced technology. Instead, they fought with the one weapon the mechanical intelligence could not counter: beautiful, organized chaos guided by desperate hope and refusal to accept defeat. Captain Dae-hyun, flying the merchant vessel New Seoul that he had converted into an improvised warship, rammed his cargo hold full of mining explosives into the largest swarm cluster while broadcasting Korean pop music at maximum volume. It should have been suicide, but the swarm's adaptive algorithms had no framework for processing an attack that combined tactical effectiveness with cultural expression and personal sacrifice. Within hours, the mechanical tide that had seemed unstoppable began to falter. The swarm had evolved to counter every logical response, but they had no defense against inspired madness backed by the human refusal to give up when others needed help. Dr. Jiwon led medical teams to plague-stricken worlds with the same fearless optimism that had once saved the galaxy from the Crimson Plague. But she did not just treat the diseases, she treated the despair that had made entire populations give up hope. Her teams worked impossible hours, singing old Earth songs as they synthesized cures through combinations of scientific knowledge and stubborn belief that every problem had a solution. The Omega Plague, designed to exploit predictable medical responses, withered before treatments that combined logic with intuition, protocol with improvisation, and medical science with the fundamental human conviction that healing required more than just correct procedures. Engineer Yunbi took one look at the failing galactic infrastructure and laughed with genuine delight before rolling up her sleeves and getting to work. "You have been treating machines like machines," she told the astonished alien technicians who had struggled for years to maintain systems they did not truly understand. "Try treating them like partners who want to help you succeed." Within weeks, atmospheric processors hummed back to life, fusion reactors stabilized their output, and communication networks recovered their reliability. The human engineers did not just fix the equipment. They re-established the symbiotic relationship between operator and machine that made complex technology possible. Ambassador Hyun Woo returned to diplomatic service with a new understanding of his role in galactic civilization. The old council had viewed diplomacy as the management of competing interests through careful procedure and formal protocol. Hyun Woo understood that true diplomacy was about helping different species remember what they had in common and why. Cooperation served everyone's interests better than conflict. The new Galactic Charter, drafted with input from every surviving species, established humanity as the galaxy's adaptive response corps. Never again would they be subject to majority vote on their own existence or methods. In exchange, humans would serve as the galaxy's immune system against existential threats, the guardians of creative chaos in an ordered universe. Admiral Seok Jin, now bearing the title Keeper of the Void Watch, established humanity's new mission, beyond the galactic rim. Human fleets would forever patrol the dark spaces between galaxies, watching for threats that conventional wisdom could not handle. They had learned to thrive in the cosmic dark, and they would ensure that nothing emerged from it to threaten the light of civilization. As human ships dispersed to their new duties across the galaxy and beyond, Communications Officer Jae Sung transmitted a message that reached every inhabited world. Humanity protects, not because we have to, but because we choose to. Not because you asked us to, but because protecting others is what makes us human. We have learned that home is not a place but a choice, and we choose to make the entire universe our home. The galaxy had learned the hardest lesson in its long history. Some things are more valuable than peace, order, and predictability. Sometimes survival requires someone willing to punch entropy in the face and tell the universe that impossible is just another word for challenge accepted. Humanity was home again, not as subjects or guests, but as the galaxy's reminder that evolution's greatest gift is not perfection, but the capacity for beautiful, necessary chaos in the service of hope. They had been cast out for being too human, and they had returned more human than ever, carrying the lesson that creativity, compassion, and the willingness to try impossible things are not weaknesses to be controlled, but strengths to be celebrated.